I have collected around 1,000 of them for this project. What I'll do here is kind of the shortest possible summation of what we found, or one possible summation, I guess. If you noticed on the first slide, it said a dark legacy, and then there were 4 mysterious X's under the title. What that was implying was that there is this term within games, or for sort of a genre of games, really, that's called 4X. And the X's stand for exploration, expansion, exploitation, and extermination. And as it happens, those are also good ways of thinking about the mechanics of Western colonialism. So there is a connection here, and I want to dig a little deeper into what that connection looks like. So here's a board game from 1969, an Australian board game called Captain Cook, Voyages of Discovery. And as you can see, it's an educational game. It tells you that you get to relive the perils of Cook's historic first voyage. Watch out for unfriendly natives, unfavorable winds, dangerous reefs, and look forward to exciting discovery unlimited. So it's a good example of what we see in these games in terms of how indigenous peoples are reduced to a resource, or in this case, an obstacle that needs to be overcome. There's no agency and a very thin representation of anyone else in these games except for the Westerners, who are the heroes of these narratives. So we see all the classical tropes of colonialism, othering, whitewashing, romanticizing, and making up an Eurocentric story about the world needing to be discovered. I think that's a clue right there for why there is so little representation of the indigenous peoples. The narrative of exploration is that things haven't really been seen before they've been seen by the eyes of a white man. So this was published by the New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Service. It's distinctly educational in tone and purpose. And in fact, up till somewhere in the 20th century, the ideas of games being just for fun was nearly non-existing. So we have a history of board games always being intended to educate or shape good morals in young people. And of course, what that amounts to from a Western perspective is colonialist propaganda. Okay, so for expansion, I picked La Conquête du Monde, a French game from 1957. Might be better known for you as Risk, which is what they renamed it to in the US. And this game was made by Albert Lamouris, who was a famous filmmaker in France. He won a Golden Palm for the short film The Red Balloon. And then he went on vacation with his family and made up this game. I think it's significant that this was a post-war era France. France were, on the winning side of the war, but they had suffered a humiliating defeat against Germany earlier in the war, and the capital, and a lot of the country was really tarnished by the Second World War. So what we see in that period is that there's a lot of nostalgia in board games and looking back to a more sort of glorious and pompous past. So if we look at the uniforms and the weapons of the military personnel on the back of the card in the middle of the picture, we can see that these are Napoleonic era uniforms and soldiers. So basically it's a game about the imperial powers dividing the world up between themselves. So an abstraction of the sort of imperialist power fantasy. The third X is exploitation. This is again a French game from 41, and it's called a trading game with the subtitle France and colonies, and that maybe sounds not so bad, like trade is good, right? But the way the game works is actually very realistic, that the colonies go out of play as their major export has been fully exploited. So it sort of shows France's view of the colonies as basically something that you can pour resources out of until there's nothing left, and then the colony is of no interest anymore. The world history scholar Enseng Ho boils down the historical impact of the emergence of Western colonialism to the new importance of state violence to markets and the marriage of cannon to trading ship. And basically, that is what is being conveyed here. And again, a government-funded game that is selling propaganda for the colonial endeavor. My last X is representing extermination. This is a German game from 1912. So it's could be translated to young Germany's battle game. So basically, it's a game made for youth, young boys in particular, something called Pathfinders, which basically translates to, or can be compared to Boy Scouts in the US. And what they are learning is basically simple battle tactics, but there's, of course, this sort of underlying and not so deeply underlying idea of nationalism and the formation of Germany as a nation state, and the importance of taking to arms to defend and build and grow this country. Okay, so these were all games that were made before video games have sort of entered the scene. A couple of decades later, we started having the first computer games. And what we saw in that sort of transition period in the 70s, this is a board game called Stellar Conquest from 1975, is that some games started to make the jump from the board to the screen. So this is the first of what is called a 4X game. So a board game that incorporates exploration, expansion, exploitation, and extermination all in the same game. They were often set in space, but really the sort of mechanics and underlying ideas are the same as in the previously shown examples that were specifically had a colonialist motifs. So this game was then made into a video game under the name Reach for the Stars in '83, and from there on we had this growth of the genre of 4X video games. Maybe Civilization is the most well-known one, but also Age of Empires and Europa Universalis and Stellaris and so on. I wanted to mention also, to close this up, some of the underlying ideas that I think exist in this particular way of utilizing these mechanics is the idea of an us and them. There's an idea of subhumanism, like you are playing the humans, you come across other species, you decide to, if you want to, exterminate them or exploit them, but it has these very dark connections to colonialism. The idea of endless expansion and exploitation, sort of an anti-sustainability ethos. We can always go further, we can always go somewhere else when we messed up or drained our own environment. The concept of manifest destiny. We're on a mission from God. We have this otherworldly directive to do this whatever it is that we're doing. So there is really no question of right or wrong. God has told us to do this. Survival of the fittest, obviously. There is this sort of social Darwinism idea that more advanced societies deserve to exploit and exterminate less advanced societies. So that's in the end how these games play out. You build up your resources, you explore your part of the galaxy, and towards the end of the game you're going to come into contact with each other, and whoever has done the first stage is the best is going to take out the others, and there can only be one reigning empire at the end. And connected to that, the idea of might makes right. In the end, we are building up all these resources so we can buy more cannons than the others. And
Michael,
yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. I want to make sure that we have lots of time for questions at the end. So right. I'm going to ask you to start closing off.
Right. Yeah. So I was sort of in the last sentence here. I was just going to say that I think that even if we use these mechanics in different ways than the explicit conquest scenarios that I have described here, we still have that sort of underlying idea of, yeah, whoever is the strongest gets to make the rules, and what happens to the others is of no moral concern. Okay, done.
Wow, thank you, Michael. Makes me think these games need trigger warnings, because it's really it really relates a lot to the conversations around rethinking the history of film, and a lot of the revisiting the history of cinema, in particular in the circles that I move in terms of documentary.
Yeah. So just a comment to the trigger warning thing. I think what happens a lot in board gaming is that people, critics, influencers, reviewers, etc., they identify that, oh, so there are themes in these games that might be upsetting to some people, but their logic is, so be careful who you play with, is something that I hear a lot. Wow. So rather than not playing that game, you don't invite the person who might, be triggered or offended or sad or, feel, put on the spot, which is, I think, in some sense even worse, that you don't even get invited to the table.
you.